Jay Papasan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Is this my second or third time? I think it might.
It's at least your second, maybe if it's
Yeah.
not your third, we'll have to have you on a third. First off, that 20%er is do that to the day you die. That is so good. Love it. Just love
Oh,
that. Love that.
and you're not even in real estate,
I'm not in real estate. I'm in sales, but not real estate. You and Gary mentioned about stealing ideas from other industries or competitors and bringing it in. That's what I do with your 20%er. Like you bring up principles, ideas, tactics. I'm like, I'm doing that in medical sales. I'm going to do that with my team. And so good.
Yeah, we
And
call it benchmarking. Yeah. So
okay.
yeah, ideas are meant to be spread.
Also, too, when you do those family retreats and you have like Ryan Holiday and all these amazing people, then you summarize that. I think I saved every one of them. And the ideas are just amazing.
And that's a fraction, man. That's just a
That's
fraction.
crazy. No, I
Because I
appreciate
can't
that.
give it all away, right? The people
Yeah,
pay
sure.
tickets. Yeah, but it's a good highlight reel, right?
It's fantastic. I appreciate you doing that. For those looking to get to know Jay a little bit better and his backstory and how he and Gary Keller, CEO of Keller Williams, wrote one of my favorite books of all time, The One Thing. Direct you back to Built Not Born episode number 81 that we recorded maybe about a year and a half ago. But today, I asked Jay to come back on the show to talk about leadership and the mindset of leadership. Him and Gary have done a phenomenal podcast called Think Like a CEO. And Jay, I was hoping maybe we could go discuss leadership, how to run organizations, and how we could bring those principles, theories, tactics, strategies you and Gary have used to write books, lead companies, kill it in the real estate market. Maybe we could bring to our everyday life and maybe to the businesses that we run, each individual listens to that they run. Is that cool?
Yeah, the lessons of leadership apply everywhere.
Let's just kick it off broad picture. How would you define the word leadership? What is it and how would you define it?
I think I'm so colored because I've been working with Gary for so long and he introduced me to a different way of looking at it that fits for me. So I think most people, when you ask them what leadership is, it's being in charge. It's being responsible for others, maybe. Like I've seen all kinds of definitions. A lot of people define a leader by whether or not anybody's following them.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we look at it is it's more of being a teacher. And it's I'll say it slowly, but it's leadership is teaching people how to think so that they do the things they need to do when they need to do them so they can get what they want when they want it. So typical of us, we're going to be very specific, and also it's a lie, but I've now like pretty much internalized it. So I'm going to say that one more time in case someone's jogging and is like, what was that? Here's the good news. Teaching people how to think is the heart of it, but you want to teach them how to think so that they do the things they need to do when they need to do them so they get what they want when they want it. And that's what's great is if evidence of a great leader is when people are doing the things they need to be doing, even when the leader's not present.
Yeah.
If they're only doing it when you're watching them, have you really led them to grow? Or are they just there to follow orders?
A true leader creates other leaders, right? I mean, yeah. So like if you can't say you're a great leader, if you've been in the business for 30 years and there's no great leader that's come out of your program, you might have been in charge, but I kind of question if you were leading, right? Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say, but I'm going to give you a nuance. I actually think that the beginning of leadership, and it's sometimes where it ends, is self-leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Like how we learn to lead ourselves.
Okay.
I think it's very hard to lead others without leading yourself. People will follow you, but at some point they see that the words and acts don't align.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know some people that are great action leaders. They're leading themselves. They're jumping in to do what needs to be done. And in some ways, they're making leaders, but they're not necessarily teaching them how to think. They're showing them how to think. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it starts with leading yourself. So like I know a few leaders that are in that category, but like, yeah, they're not actually doing the other half of it. So now you got me thinking. I was trying to find the exception because that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. So you start off the podcast, Think Like a CEO. The first season, you and Gary, there's a great quote that Gary said a couple times. you and Gary discussed life is a series of decision-making moments. And so you're talking about self-leadership, decision-making moments. There are points where you have to decide what to do. You have to prioritize and execute. There's so much coming at everyone. You have to filter through the noise to figure out which your most high-value task, get that task, schedule it on your calendar, protect that time, and execute that time to work on the most important thing. Right? Does that mean, is that like the start of that decision-making moment?
Well, that's where it lines up on a day-to-day basis, right? Am I leading myself in the sense that like I know what I need to do? Am I clear about it? Am I clear about the progress I need to make? Do I have time protected to go do that thing? Like when you were saying that, like I told you, like we plan them, we outline them, and then we go in front of the microphones and record them. Okay. And I personally, my team does, I don't go back and listen to them often. I've done a little bit here and there. When you first said that quote, my first connection was to this idea of milestones. Like if I asked you, Joe, how did you get to where you are today, right? In your sales career and doing a podcast, you could look over your shoulder and there's probably a series of relationships and milestone moments that got you where you are today. And it's easier to see those in the rearview mirror than it is to identify them when they're happening. And so a lot of times you've got to be leading yourself that day to day so that when that moment arrives and you don't know it's a milestone moment, that you're about to meet the love of your life right around the corner, or the partner that's going to help you launch the venture of your dreams, whatever that is, you've got to be day by day present and able to kind of hopefully identify that moment and that's where it really shows up in those moments. Like I know Gary can trace them in his career and I can too.
Everyone's defined by the big moments and totally makes sense.
Yeah, but they're also like the reason they get defined by them is most of the time, it's not like they were slacking all the time. And then that day they got to be the hero. We read about those sometimes in the news. Ordinary guy stops the bank robbers, right? Whatever that is. And it made for TV movie. Great. Awesome. A lot of times someone is showing up on the corner, doing exactly what they needed to do, and then patiently waiting for timing to find them, right? It just means that you're doing it every day. And if you do it every day, sometimes luck will strike at a disproportionate rate. It's that whole thing. Like the more I practice, the luckier I am. Can't remember, was that Arnold Palmer or Jack Nicklaus that said that?
One of the golfers. It's easy to lead like on a sunny day where you're growing at 20% and the person in charge and it's smooth sailing. Like it's easy to captain a ship where you're sailing through a 80-degree harbor and there's no wind and the water's 80 degrees. Like anyone can do that almost. But like life's going to strike, fortune's going to turn, the economy's going to crash. One of the things I found so interesting is that you and Gary went into the Great Recession in 2007, number 4 in your market. And then when the dust settled and the economy came back, you were number 1.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about leadership. What caused that? And what did you guys focus on when it got really bad? Look at the economy was going to crash, especially real estate. It's real easy not to buy a house when everything's bad. What did you guys focus on? How'd you do that?
Well, one of the blessings of working with Gary is it wasn't his first downturn. And remember, when you're living in history, you don't know the size of it.
Okay. Sure.
When our grandparents were in World War II, they didn't know that it was World War II, right? They didn't know when it was going to end, any of that stuff. They just knew that the Allies and the Axis were fighting around the world. In the Great Recession, they didn't call it the Great Recession until 2013.
Yeah, sure.
In the beginning, it was just like recession, and we were afraid it was going to be a depression.
Yep.
So Gary had been through a few of those. In Texas, there was a savings and loan bust when he was first launching the company that was devastating. The local board of realtors here went from 4,000 to under 2,000 in less than a year. And so he had already seen what happens when the world just your world gets devastated. And he'd observed what the best people do. So it's funny, he's so vigilant, having survived that early in the company, he's always waiting for it to happen. One, because he knows how to behave and he sees it as an opportunity because of that. Most people panic. They either bury their head in the sand and hope it goes away, or they do the wrong thing. And we actually wrote a whole book, Shift. about the lessons he's learned. And that is actually one of the first things we did during the shift. I want to say most of the world did not recognize us as being in a serious recession until Lehman Brothers. And I want to say that was 2008. When that collapsed, everybody was like, okay, this just got very real.
Yep.
How bad can this be? In the fall of 2005, we were masterminding with the top people in our business. And Gary, because he'd been through 2 or 3 at that point in his career, one of them said, are y'all seeing anything strange? Because remember, 2005, 2006, if you go back and look at home prices, they were going through the roof.
Crazy. Yeah. Crazy.
I mean, it was the hottest and it was the bubble that was about to burst. One of the top agents said, it's weird. I've just been watching for 2 straight months. The inquiries to look at our homes have been going down, down, down. And so a listing agent, which is very rare, right? A lot of people don't realize how few agents list a lot of homes. Very few do that. Everybody lists 1 or 2 if they're actually in the business. But for you to be having 10 or 20 listings a month, you're in the top 1% of the 1%. That's who's in the room. And everybody said, my showings is going down. My showings is going down. And I remember, like, we all realized, okay, this is the canary. And Gary called it. It's like, this is the first step that buyers, they've had enough. They won't come and look at it. This is before they back out of contracts and say no more. And we actually started preparing for the shift almost 2.5 years before it was officially recognized. Now, by the way, 2006, we saw this weird thing where it was that all the signs were starting to turn, but they weren't yet negative. So it's the velocity of the shift. You're like, but wait, there's still only 3 months of inventory. Yeah, but it went from 1 month to 3 months in 26 days. Like the velocity of change and the direction of change is negative. So, wow, how do we behave? We studied, we masterminded, education and coaching, accountability. From a sales standpoint, you should know this. We went very heavily into prospecting, right? Direct contact, picking up the phone, knocking on their door, meeting them in person. 1, because it costs you less money. And 2, you find out what people are responding to. And when you find out, like I remember, I don't even know why it took us so long to figure it out, but it took us like 18 months. I was interviewing a guy and he said, the line that I'm using right now to just hook people is, I know the market stinks, but if I found a deal, Joe, would you be interested if I found a deal? And they're like, well, yeah, that's the whole point. Nobody was buying anything because they were waiting for the screaming hot deal. He goes, well, every week I put out my best deals in the market list, but I only do it for my clients. If you would like to sign an exclusive work with me contract, I'd be happy to share the best bargains every single week. And he was just stacking them up. All the people that had dry powder to go spend in that market. And if I have one regret, Joe, is that we weren't buyers. We weren't sellers, but my wife and I weren't yet at a place where we had the resources to pay cash for assets. I know lots of people who did, and they made a killing. So anyway, I'm sure I've strayed from your question.
No, you hit it right on.
Very serious. We cut expenses. We got into prospecting. We made sure that we had qualified leads because most people were not serious. And we got here's the for people not in real estate. We went right back to the basics and we did not get distracted by anything else.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That is such a game plan for like a recession or a tough area. You mentioned that a few times in the podcast where you guys, where Keller Williams, you charged into the storm. You leaned into it. You acknowledged it. You leaned into it. You ran through it. And you basically kept consistently doing things to set yourself up regardless of what happens, kind of like knocking on doors. And you did the simple things well, right?
Do the simple things well. Back to the basics. Yeah. You know, that story of Charge the Storm is interesting. And it was just a metaphor. I've read about it in a few books, but Gary, I don't know where he got it that time, but a lot of times animals that are being in a snowstorm, a winter snowstorm, they will hunker down and wait for it to pass. The buffalo, like creature of the plains, where when weather happens, it happens and it happens bad. For whatever reason, they've evolved where they actually walk into the storm. And the whole point is they get out the other side faster.
Yeah.
And that's what that charge the storm reference was about. Like, we have a choice. We can hunker and hope that it doesn't stall out right above us, or we can start taking action and get out, like head right at it. And I love that attitude.
Yeah. And you mentioned the data, the research you did is that companies that give up market share, especially during the recession, rarely get it back.
Oh, I love that you thought of that. That's great. That's a quote that I really attached myself to. There's a guy named, I want to say his name is Jeffrey Calkin. He was a Fortune or a Forbes writer, and he wrote a book called The Upside of the Downturn. And that was my biggest takeaway. There's actually two takeaways, but that was the biggest one, is that again and again, companies who gave up market share during a recession rarely got it back. And the people who gained it didn't give it back. So it was like, this is not when we make a lot of profit. This is when we gain a lot of market share, became kind of our attitude.
Yeah.
Because when the market comes back and we've gone from, like, we went from like 7% to like 14%. And when the market explodes upwards, now you've got twice as much market share. You get twice as much of the benefit.
And then when things go up, when the good times always return. I mean, you look at just the three that
cycle.
It's a cycle. Like the three I remember, and like I could vividly, I was not part of, but I was part of the economy and work. You had 9/11. Then you had the 2007, 2008, like crash or recession. And then we had COVID, right? So you had 1, 2, 3, where the stock market, real estate down, but then it just comes up stronger than ever. You have to weather the storm. And then you and Gary came up with, either I teased this out or you had an episode on this, your recession mindset, 6 things to do when things go bad to come out the other side stronger. So I'll run these by you. Tell me what is top of mind, what you think. First one, be positive. In a recession, don't have a recession mindset.
I mean, it's so huge. Like, you're already discouraged. You can either dwell on the stuff that you can't control.
Yep.
And then, you know what? Like, what I've learned, Joe, like the longer I've tried to live a big life, and you just get used to failure, you get used to adversity, and you still go through that stage of woe is me. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
But then you move through it faster. And so, especially as a leader, the faster we can get from the bad part of what's happening us to the opportunity of what's happening us, then our people can get behind that too.
Yep.
Whenever we've gone through rough times in the companies that I've run, or the divisions that I've run for Gary's companies, I usually tell them one thing that's for certain. It's not just companies that gain market share and jump ahead. People do too. When there's a lot of change, that's one of the times in your career, it'll be really hard. It won't be fun, but that's where people make giant leaps forward.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough people to do the work. And you can raise your hand and say, I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to learn, right? I've always, and like, you don't have to wait years for that opportunity because you've, quote, earned it. The market is giving you the opportunity to take leap forward and say, can we just take that attitude into this market?
Absolutely. 2 things. One, what you said, and something that I had a Vietnam vet say a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. One, this is like the buffalo. You charge into the storm to get to the other side faster, right? You actually lean into it and go in through it. Yeah. So sooner you get through it, the sooner you do the benefit of the good things you did during it. I just had a Vietnam veteran named Robin Bartlett. He was an Army Ranger, 82nd Airborne member in Vietnam.
Wow.
And he comes from a family of West Pointers. And he said, it took my grandfather 10 years to be a captain. It took my dad 8 years to be a captain. It took me 1 year to be a captain because I was in combat and there was heavy casualties. I was in the thick of it. And after 1 year, like he was leading his troops. And after a year, they're like, you're going to be a first lieutenant. He got promoted so much faster because he was in the midst of chaos and he was weathering the storm.
Now, if your kid joined the Army, you would not wish the Vietnam War on them.
Yeah, sure. No,
right?
By no stretch.
But if the Vietnam War happened to them, and they were committed to that, you'd be like, you know what? Here's what might be a blessing for you. You're going to accumulate experiences that some soldiers never get, and that will allow you to have a career as big as you want in this field. So that's a very hardcore example, but it's true everywhere, right? I've seen it where half the staff, like, we're not returning to the office, we're quitting.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Those few that stayed loyal now have 1, 2, or 3 jobs each, which sucks. probably aren't going to earn a raise because the company could just die, but they also have the extraordinary opportunity to show what they're made of in extraordinary circumstances and build the trust of the leadership and ownership. So like always, sometimes you want to be like really smart out the response when someone's trying to be pointing out the positive. What you don't want to do is be Pollyanna-ish.
Okay.
You want to be realistic, acknowledge that this comes with a giant, I can't think of a nice way to say it, basically a shit sandwich. Like it comes with that too, but there's opportunity. I think if you're real about it, people will hear you. If you're Pollyanna-ish, they won't believe you and they'll go right back to the negative self-talk.
Yeah, that's so true. No, thanks for sharing that. Second part of the recession mindset, continually play offense. Always have a growth mindset, always on the attack. And that's so counterintuitive because when things are going bad, you want to knuckle down and you want to play defense usually. Sometimes you think that, right? I mean, that's kind of human nature to a degree.
Or you pitch the things that could be seen as defense as offensive maneuvers.
Yeah.
Like even expense cutting, right? Like you have to find your margin. If you've got your expenses built around selling 100 widgets a week and you're now selling 75, you've got to find your financial footing fast. Why? Because you are nothing if not on the defensive if you're losing money. And so like Gary's thought on that is like the first company to find their margin can then take that margin and attack the enemy. If I get to where I can make money selling 75 widgets, close, not as much as I made selling 100, but I'm now positive, I can take that incremental gain while my competitor is still reeling, trying to find it, and I can start discounting my widgets. Hey, I know that Joe sells his for 26 cents. I'm going to put mine on sale for 22. And I'm going to try to make my competitor's pain worse so that I can get market share. So the offense in a shift is not necessarily for profit, but for mind share and market share with whatever industry you're in. And when the market stabilizes, that's when you can more likely profit from it.
Yeah. I like the mind share too, market share and mind share. I never heard it termed that way. That is great.
Well, if you're in sales, you're looking for mind share, right?
Yeah.
And the people who might buy your products.
Absolutely. No, because then they use you, and then all of a sudden when things get good, and then when they go from 100 uses a month to back to their 300, right? And then all of a sudden you're back in the game. It's so cool. That's really good.
And who was there for them? Your customers sometimes are suffering too.
Yep.
Who was there saying, look, I mean, I can take it down to this level. Like, how did you help them through it? Because they won't necessarily, but they often are loyal to you because you won that mind share by being the person who stood out.
Yeah. How did you help them during the downturn? That's great. And then I love the third one, listen more than ever. And that sounds great. But then also you said, not just what you listen to, two things I wrote down from that, share best practices, even with your competitors.
Yeah.
That is cool. Could you go into that? How you guys did that? I thought that was really creative.
Well, I think right now you're looking for, has anybody figured out what's actually working in this market? Has anybody figured out the answer or an answer? And not every industry is a zero-sum game. I know some folks who have coaching programs, and by and large, if you have an executive coach, you're not going to hire a second one. You're going to fire yours and hire the other one. So like, I know some coaching companies, and some people might say it doesn't have to be that way, but I've experienced that. As a book author, like I've always felt liberated. When people are coming from pain to the bookshelf, I need to solve my productivity problem. They don't just buy our book. They buy Atomic Habits. They buy, Getting Stuff Done by David Allen. They buy all of the books because our people tend to shop a category and not be that exclusive. If they really want to solve a problem, they go buy a stack of books and they read them one at a time. You hope yours is first.
Yep.
So it's not that sort of competitiveness. I live in the world where we have a book, we sell training and coaching. And so when the market died in COVID, the story I tell from my personal experience is here we had a company where like 60% of our revenue came from in-person corporate training. Guess what? March of 2020, that went away.
Yep.
For a lot of companies until well into 2021, well into it. So a huge part of your revenue base just goes away.
Mm-hmm.
I was also leading our education here for Keller Williams, and we had to pivot to virtual as fast as we could. So I started interviewing our people. I started asking them, who do you know? I went to the man that was leading our training company, and I just said, what relationships have you found so far in the industry with people who might be our competitors? But we actually get to work together. He had made good friends with someone at Franklin Covey. He had become friends with Susan Scott, who's the founder of the Fierce Conversations organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend that ran Exchange, John Bergdorf. And there was one other one. We started doing masterminds. And some people, all we got were, man, we're in the same boat too. Mm-hmm. Well, if I think of something, I'll call you. Like, no answers, but at least you didn't think, well, at least I'm not screwing it up. Franklin Covey is struggling. I mean, and they're Franklin Covey. Mm-hmm. So surely it's not just me. So there's psychic relief. But something in our conversation with John Bergdorf unlocked an answer, is that everybody was doing Zoom bad. And he had already done not just Zoom, but GoToMeeting. He'd already professionally figured out how to do it in a really interesting way. Mm-hmm. So think about this. This is in like May of 2020. And I show up and he's got a switchboard. He's got a real like full on Canon camera he's got 2 cameras, mm-hmm. lighting, music. He is doing multiple viewpoints for just a mastermind meeting.
Wow.
And he had an Elmo. So he had 3 camera angles he was toggling between. He could do his screen, and he was doing it all seamlessly without ever losing eye contact. And he was demonstrating to me, it's like, oh, everybody's going to hate Zoom, is what he was telling us. He goes, it's really hard to train in this environment because people can be on their phones, mm-hmm. they can be on their email. It's very hard for them to focus.
Yeah. So
you have to perform at like a 3 to 4x intensity to mm-hmm. even keep their attention. And then you have to constantly be changing the dynamic. And I'm not giving away he poured into us for like an hour. I immediately signed up to send all of our trainers to his training, and we started implementing the next day.
Wow.
I bought the equipment that we needed to buy, mm-hmm. and immediately we started winning the virtual corporate contract game. Mm-hmm. And we actually, I was so mad. I went to go see if we could get the tax. Like, if your revenue dropped a certain point and you didn't lay anybody off, there was a massive tax cut. Mm-hmm. And I went back to our accountants and they were like, no, you kind of grew revenue by the end of the year. You had a horrible dip and you didn't lay people off. So good karma. But by the end of the year, y'all had recovered and we're up year over year. So you don't qualify. And I was like, I've never been so mad to be so good when I saw that tax credit.
You recovered way too fast. Oh my gosh.
So that's what we mean, right? If your industry is open-minded about it, maybe like you're in the dry cleaning business and there's not a chance you're in a cutthroat competition in your town.
Yep.
Talk to someone in another town.
Yeah.
I would start calling people all over the country that are not my competitors and saying, how are you coping with this market?
That's great.
I would love to share ideas. And if I have any ideas, I'm happy to share them with you. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. I love how you say you're in a local business where maybe it's real cutthroat with the 2 or 3 in your little town or your region. You go outside your little town or region where the emotion's gone, you're not really competing with each other, and you could just share ideas. That's fantastic, that mastermind. And also, too, I love how you, Gary, brought it back even to, I know you're authors, but like you brought it back to the bookstore and books. Gary said, like, when he goes through challenges, you and Gary both go to the bookstore, you buy books, and you learn from people that came before you. Could be a year before you or 100 years before you, right? Yeah. And that is such a great idea that I think goes overlooked. Where like, you're not the first person to go through a recession. You're not the first person to go through a crisis, not the first person to go through a pandemic. You could read, I remember Ryan Holiday talking about, read John Barry's book, The Great Influenza of 1917 or 18, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the whole outline, what happened in the 1917, 18 happened again. It's just different names and the clothes were different. And the technology, it's like people didn't want to get the vaccine. And then there was a second wave and they thought it was over and it came back and they didn't trust the government. Like it's the whole thing happened again 100 years later. It's crazy. It's all out of a book. You buy a book and you see it coming before, CNN does basically.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of his name now. I'm going to go crazy. He wrote The Psychology of Money.
Morgan Housel.
Morgan Housel.
Yeah.
On one of his blogs, he talked about, like, people say, things are changing at a rapid pace, but maybe it's instructive to ask the question, what are the things that won't change in the next 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
And like, yes, there's all this change happening, but the point of why I'm connecting those is human nature, how we respond to crisis, that natural disasters will happen, that wars sadly will break out, that recessions will come and go. Those are things that don't change. Now, what causes the recession, all of the ones that I've been in business for have all been different, right? I remember a recession in the 90s, and I'm trying to think I felt like it was a hangover from some of the tax policies of the 80s. And so it was more regional to the Northeast of America. I remember that much. But I was just like, I was in my first job then. So I was just starting to pay attention. I went through the tech bubble and bust after 9/11. And that was, like what happens, but what caused it and how we worked through it were different. The Great Recession was incredibly unusual in the history, right? It was the second worst recession of all time. And then COVID was like a meteor strike. Aliens landed. I mean, no one could have anticipated it, but they could have said, you know what, about every 20 years, something that's going to feel like a meteor strike is going to happen. And that would be true, right?
Sure.
So I like the idea of going up one level and say, yes, there's going to be a 500-year event about every 15 to 25 years. Just plan on it.
Yeah, it's so true. And you could learn so much from who came before you. I remember I was reading a Churchill book and this is like in World War II, they're thinking about how to cross the English Channel. And he's like, how did William the Conqueror do it back in the Middle Ages, who went to France and who crossed the English Channel? And they were looking like at routes that he took like 1,000 years before. Like it's crazy what you can learn. And there's a lot of the principles remain the same. How about,
have you read, if you're a Winston Churchill fan, are you a Winston Churchill fan?
Absolutely.
So a great book is by Gretchen Rubin. Called 40 Ways of Looking at Winston Churchill.
Really? Gretchen Rubin. All right.
Yeah, no, it's like one of her things. And evidently there's more biographies written of Churchill than pretty much anyone else.
Yep.
And she's like a connoisseur of them and realized, depending on which ones you read, he's a good father, a bad father, a good politician, a bad, and she presents them in opposition throughout. And it really paints a unique picture of his life. So if you're a fan, I recommend that book.
I am all over that. I'm going to put that in the show notes. So I bought one. I love Andrew Roberts. He has a Churchill book this big, and I bought it 3 years ago, and it still scares me to open it. It's just so thick. I might have to punt and go to the
what's good about the Gretchen Rubin that she reads the book. I actually listened to it on audio and adored it because she's a great reader. Like,
she's great. She has a book, not to go off track, The Happiness Project. It's a line-a-day journal. And my wife and I have done that journal for like 8 or 9 years. We're like on our second book, and we could look back like 8 years ago, like what happened that day that, caught our attention. It was pretty cool. I love it. How about the fourth one? You put live outside your comfort zone. See change as a strategy, not a threat. Then I kind of 4-starred this one. Change is inevitable. Participation is optional.
Well, that's a playoff of an older quote that survival is optional.
Okay.
That came from another book, right? It's not just participation, survival of your company, maybe not you personally. The one that struck me of those was make change a part of your strategy, not something that you're afraid of. I think when these big monumental moments happen, and maybe we're like, we keep waiting for the other shoe to drop with inflation, right? I know that the housing market is in a deep recession, pretty much any business that relies on the cost of money right now is hurt really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost of money is high, not just for houses, but for anybody that needs to, they need to borrow money to make inventory to sell it later. Like, it affects anybody who relies on the cost of money.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else is doing great. Unemployment's unbelievable, right? The jobs report. So you're like, where are we in this whole thing? I think that most people respond to change with, I don't want to. I don't want to participate in this. But when you lean into it, it's kind of amazing what happens. This might be going all the way back to Charge the Storm. But like, I'll tell you a conversation that never made it in the podcast, that didn't make it onto the stage. We were talking, we did a piece for one of ours called the 12 people mistakes CEO makes. And we'll probably do a full podcast on it. But one of them was they don't hire killers. And that killers as in, like the type, like someone who's going to kill it in the job, not literally assassins, right? And Jason, who's one of our partners, said, I don't know that I'm hiring the right people. And how would I even know? And Gary basically said, rarely it's in their history, but what you have to do as their leaders, you have to always be pushing them out of their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
See what happens when they have to make rapid adjustments. There are people, and it's like, he goes, there are some people that, yes, they are really good at that, but everybody can learn. And when Gary said that, like 11 days prior, he had asked us to take a collection of these one-page models that one of my colleagues had been building and turn it into a published book. And he wanted it like in less than 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was an incredible ask on the cusp of one of our biggest events, and have it for sale at that event. And he didn't do it like a tyrant. He just said, I want you to ask the question, what will we have to do? And how can you make this happen? Is it possible? And what are the risks? And we ended up doing it. We ended up selling I want to say 15,000 copies of that in the first month.
Wow.
Which would be huge for a traditional book, much less one that's just basically something we had manufactured and spiral bound, right? Mm-hmm. But I immediately started asking the question, because it had been kind of hell to do that. And I was like, oh, he just tested us. He didn't wait. Like, periodically, he asked for something that feels like it might be impossible, just to show us that we're capable of it. Mm-hmm. So when the market crashes, that's not necessarily part of our belief system that we won't make it. Does that make sense? Like,
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. And I don't even know why I'm doing it, but like, there was a little bit of that moment for me. I was like, oh, I'm living in this quote right now.
Yeah. You mentioned about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. You mentioned Mr. Miyagi, and like, you look at the map behind me. One of the reasons, like myself and a bunch of my friends train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is the odds of us getting into a fight at 50 years old is very low. But like, we train like this morning, we trained at 6 a.m. and we're all wrestling and trying to choke each other unconscious. That's the most uncomfortable we're going to be all day, no matter what happens with customers, with whatever you do. Like, I have someone 50 pounds heavier, 10 years younger on me trying to choke me unconscious. And there's no way, unless something absolutely insane happens to me the rest of the day, I'll never be that uncomfortable where the rest of the day is going to be a breeze. Does that make sense? Because I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. And and they wonder why you're so chill and you're so relaxed. Well, I already got my panic attack earlier in the morning training jiu-jitsu. So like, I'm fine the rest of the day.
Well, it's like the Duke women's basketball coach, that video, and I shared it in my newsletter not long ago. She's like, learn to do hard better.
Yeah. Learn to do.
It is a really good thing. It's hard to do as a parent some days, because our instinct is to make it easier. But my wife told me once, because I was impatient and I was tying my youngest shoes because we were going to be late to school and I was going to be late to work. And she said, I know why you did that, but you realize every time you tie his shoes, you're not just making the morning go better. You're suddenly telling him that you don't believe he can do it.
Yeah.
And that was a hard thing for me to hear.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, then we're going to have to get up earlier and do it better, so that hard task, he will discover that he can do it. And it's just going to take patience and time.
Yeah, it's like a short-term win, but long-term negative results because you get that short-term win, but you don't build that long-term independence or confidence.
Of
Yeah, I
course,
could
we do that
absolutely.
all the time. We're trying to have a great year at the expense of our career.
Yeah, no, totally true. A great day at the expense of the month or the quarter. Totally get it. How about
Yeah.
the next point that you and Gary speak of? Focus on what you can control. And that sounds so cliche. Kind of like my backup point was don't fight what you can't control. It sounds like, oh, that's easy to do. It is so easy to get wrapped up in things that you cannot control. Say there's 10 things in front of you. There might be only two you can control. One you can influence a little, and the rest you can't do anything about. And your whole attention's got to be on those three things that you have some sort of influence with, right?
Yeah. And it has to be repeated often because for whatever reason, people don't hear it.
Yeah.
They don't live it in the moment. I mean, I have a lot of friends right now that have families in the Middle East that are just doom scrolling as soon as they get home.
Yeah.
And I feel horrible about it. It's heartbreaking. At the same time, it's like, how much energy do I want to give something that I don't have much control over?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, wherever that is, right? If I'm watching the stock market go down and I'm invested in the stock market, I can't control the stock market. I can only control my reaction to it.
Yep.
So I actually would say your response to it. I think that's one thing that we could all differentiate. It's okay to have the reaction of, oh crap, this
Mm-hmm.
sucks. This is horrible. But then you have to rationally to say, now as a business person, this is a business context, how am I going to respond?
Mm-hmm.
And when you make that shift from reaction to response, you're on the right track.
Let's just say you're in a business meeting and you have a colleague that says something or does something during the meeting that you really are against. You can go off the handle and say something almost like the toothpaste out of the tube, something you could regret for months on end,
Yeah.
right? Or you could like take a breath. What's that Viktor Frankl say? That distance between things that make you respond and your response, right? That space, that make that space as long as possible, and just figure out what you can control, keep your emotions in check, and then just handle what's in your control. That's all you can do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's easy to say,
So hard to
easy to
do.
hear, hard to do.
Yeah, it's so hard to.
I,
It's yeah.
I will say this, the more times you go through difficult things and the more confidence you have that you will survive, the easier it is to go from reaction to response.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that just comes with some wisdom, right? It's like,
Yep.
I've been through tough times before. This might be different, but I am resilient. I am resourceful, or we are resilient. We are resourceful. It might suck, but we'll find a way. And that's
Yeah.
just a very different attitude to acknowledge the pain, but also believe that there will be a path out. And I like, maybe it's crazy to think, and maybe we'll look back on this and there's a gift here that we're not seeing today.
Yeah, that gift in the silver lining, that silver lining in the cloud. There's always a gift that comes out of some struggle, no matter how horrible it is. There's always some positive that comes out of it. No, it's
Well,
so true.
sometimes there's the only thing positive out of it is a lesson learned,
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
right?
True.
I think
True.
my worst days often bring my hardest but best lessons.
Mhm.
If I learn them, then I can avoid having another horrible day like that. But it doesn't change the nature of the day. There's nothing else redeemable about it other than I can guarantee you I will not make that mistake twice.
You're never going to do that. Yeah, you're never going to do that again, right? So that
Yeah.
situation may be just a pile of crap that you have to deal with, and you may regret that decision for a long time. But knowing that if you're ever in that situation again, you're going to respond differently. You're not going to react. You're going to respond, and it's going to be different. No, that's great.
Yep.
The last point about the recession mindset, the sixth thing, and this is probably the one I went deepest on: learn to live with certainty during uncertain times. Know who you are. Know who you are not. And the other point I put is when you know who you know what brings you purpose and power.
Yeah. There are moments where if you understand what truly matters and like the things that you're certain of, I love my wife, I love my kids, then some of the material things are easier to shed. My favorite story is from Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way.
Oh, love it.
Thomas Edison had his huge complex and it caught on fire. And they were like chemicals. I mean, the whole place is burning down. He's losing everything. And his son finds him in the dark, staring at the flames. And he just turns and says, go find your mother and sisters and bring them here. They'll never see a fire like this again in their lifetime. And I just was like,
Blows your way. It's a great story.
How? But I mean, he'd done hard things. He'd invented the impossible.
Yeah.
And so like, there's a part of him that's like, they can't take that from me. This disaster won't. And like, I'm sure he was already plotting, how do I rebuild better? And he did. And he was more profitable after.
That's crazy. Go grab your mother. She'll never see a fire like this again. That is so crazy. So crazy.
It stuck with me, that story.
Yeah, it did. That book, I read that book. I found Ryan during, I blew my ACL out like the year it came out. And I read that book like 3 times during the rehab. And incredible writer, incredible writing. And speaking of books, Gary mentions 9 out of 10 times you and Gary find your breakthrough through books. I know we mentioned this already, but you don't underestimate the value of learning a lesson in something like that through Edison or something through history, right?
I know a lot of smart people that would say the same things. There's no price to a library card. So you don't even have to put a price tag on it. You have access to all the knowledge of the millennia that's been recorded. And a lot of times, because it had to be written, people had to make better sense of it than they could at the time it happened. So there is a lot of wisdom to be learned if you're willing to look back at history.
Yeah, so true. And then another point during the uncertain times, you and Gary mentioned study your competition, but more importantly, study other industries to find your best ideas. Just me personally, in my little micro world, I use your 20% newsletter. Like, I am not in the real estate business at all, but I'm in like the people business, the sales business, the growth business. And you have just ideas and principles in that 20% newsletter that just can go across any industry. You could kind of get it, make it your own, and apply it to your industry. But that's what you're speaking of, right? Stealing ideas from other industries.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of times there's like different ways that creativity shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's borrowing an idea that works in another industry that they think of as common, but it's uncommon in yours.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So even though in real estate, they'd be like, everybody does that. But in medical sales, people are like, what planet are you from? And they're going to think you're crazy creative. Mm-hmm. So I usually just tell people, because I'm an author, if you're going to borrow someone's words, give them credit. If you're going to take an idea, which people do, and combine it, Frankenstein it into something better, I still like to give credit wherever possible. Just make it your own.
Sure.
Like if you've read Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist.
Love it. Yeah.
That's what he's saying. Like, yes, you can borrow and be inspired by the greats, but then you have to make it your own. That is the journey.
What's going on in Austin? Austin, Kleon, Holiday, Ryan Holiday, yourself. Got some writers down there.
I saw that Austin. T-shirt. Yeah. There's a lot of creatives here. I mean,
crazy.
Nashville's kind of a sister city.
Yeah.
If you don't want to live in LA or New York, it's one of those hubs.
Yeah.
Where, like, I think Tim Ferriss kind of led the way when he moved here.
Yep.
Then Noah Kagan came, and a few other kind of in that kind of category of podcasting and YouTube and some other things. Then you've got Joe Rogan, and now it's like they had enough gravitational pull to kind of pull their friends and posse in, and then that creates a little bit of a wave. It's
like a Silicon Valley for writers and creative types down there. It's crazy. That's so cool. Just wrapping up here. I know your time's limited. Jay, a couple fun questions, couple rapid fire at the end.
Okay.
Real quick. So what purchase, and I'll give credit. I'm a huge Tim Ferriss fan. These are sort of, I stole some of these ideas from him.
Okay.
What purchase of $100 or less most positively impacted your life? Can you think of something?
Oh, gosh. I'll cheat. And I think it was like $135. During COVID, we got a massage gun.
Yeah.
And I've had 3 spinal surgeries. So
wow.
I've gotten my money's worth out of that sucker. Okay. I was just reflecting to my wife that we bought just one of those portable chargers for your phone. Mm-hmm. And it's been on like 3 continents with us. And I just keep thinking it's just going to die.
Yeah.
But like whenever we know that we're going to be like on a long plane ride or whatever.
Yeah.
We were just talking about it at the F1 race. And I was like, because my son had borrowed it to go on a trip. And I was like, man, that thing, I was trying to remember how long ago we bought it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm real simple. Like I have to wear a mouth guard at night.
Yep.
I got one of those little, I think it's probably like less than $100, like little sonic things that cleans it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
right? Because it's just gross to put a
Yeah.
mouth guard in your mouth that it's not clean. And so for me to get that super clean and not have to do it manually, love
Yeah.
it. So I'm a simple man. Stuff like that is going to be on the top of my list.
I appreciate that. Perfect. How about what's the worst advice you see or hear being dispensed in your industry?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think that a lot of people, oh, and this is in real estate, way over index on the brand on the big sign matters.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that it's not about the brand, it's about the culture. And sometimes they're synonymous, but I see a lot of people obsessed with, which brands do revenue sharing, which brands do my advertising, and they're thinking about brands and services versus culture and opportunity. And I'll take a great culture that has the legs of opportunity over someone paying for or doing things for me all day long, because I'm going to make more of it.
Mm-hmm.
You really made me think on that one, though. That was like, I had to really think. So great question.
Oh, awesome. How about this? What have you changed your mind about over the last few years?
I actually shared this on one of my videos, so I'm just going to go with it.
Hit me. Go.
I used to think that good ideas were far rarer than they are. And like I was reflecting, somebody was asking me, like, how many books have you and Gary done? And we've done 11 book projects, 6 of them with our names on them. But we've said no to like 1,000 ideas. Like we are idea machines because we love books and we're always seeing gaps in the market. Someone should write a book about this. Oh, someone should write a book about that. And the reality is the world is full of great ideas, but you have to find one that absolutely matches where you're going, your passion, and your gifts, so that you can go 100% all in on it and make it an extraordinary idea. So I think that great ideas will fail, actually. I think it takes an extraordinary idea. I've just gotten even more refined.
Yeah.
Because I just, like, people come to me all the time and say, oh, I've got this idea, and everybody says I should write a book. And a lot of times, like, I've heard that idea 20 times.
Yeah.
Because I've been a student of that game for a long time. It's not a bad idea, but it's not one that's really gonna take over the market. So that's kind of where I am. I do think I was a prey to that.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't believe in the abundance.
Yeah.
That I would have another opportunity to do that. And it might be 10 times better. So I would say yes to the first thing, only to regret it later.
Yep. It's almost like that Warren Buffett saying. They said for every 99, every great 100 ideas someone brings to me, I say no to 99 of them, even though they're good ideas. Like he knows his one thing, right? He knows what his one thing is, and he just focuses on that. And if it's not in his one thing, he lets someone else go do it, because he's not losing focus, even though it's a good idea, so to speak. Awesome. Last question. Yeah. As you look out to the year ahead, what's the most exciting project you're working on now?
So in the last year, I would have said the 20% newsletter. That's been my first weekly deadline of my entire writing career. So that's been a real journey of building new habits and process. And that's been great. I feel like I'm living that Rocky scene where he's chasing chickens and getting stronger while the inspirational music's going every week. And I really do think I've grown as a writer. So that's been great. But right now, at this moment, for 17 years, my wife and I have done a goal setting retreat. And it has made the difference in our relationship. Within a few years of doing it, our friends started asking for our process, and we'd share it on a Microsoft Word doc, and then a Google Doc. And then eventually 7 years ago, we started hosting an event for other people. And consistently, the number one, I get a lot of this, so maybe I pay the reticular activator makes me pay attention. This saved my marriage. This saved my business. This saved my partnership.
Yeah, sure.
Right. It's just it's a really good mechanism for getting two people, or even one person, to really connect with where they're ultimately going, why it's important to them, and the next steps they need to do. And if they're going with someone, how to communicate along that journey. For us, it was the couples. Yeah. We have 2 drivers, no support people. Yep. Like, how do we communicate so that we work together? So we're building right now, we're building a on-demand version of that.
Awesome.
So we're in the process of, instead of people having to always get, I mean, we've done it and we'll keep doing it. It is great in person, and that'll always be a rich 2-day experience. There's so many people who just can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm super excited. Check us out at the One Thing sometime around right before December 1. And I'm super excited that we're going to make that available at a much more affordable price point for everyone. So a virtual goal setting or on demand goal setting retreat gets me really excited, because I know like my number one value is impact.
Yeah.
And over the years, before we even turned it into a business event, we were helping people in the areas that mattered most, for often their marriage, their relationship with their kids, their parents, like really deep stuff. So I know it has impact, and I'm excited to be able to share it with more people.
Well, impact. That's especially doing it with your partner, because when one person has an idea or a vision, if they don't have their partner with you, it's not going to work. Someone wants to get their financial plan in order, life in order, health in order. Like one can't have a super healthy, clean diet and one doesn't, or one says, I'm not going to spend credit cards, and the other one says, not on board. Like you've got to do that as a partner. You got to do that as a couple, right? Or just it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. And I think it's going to fall apart, or the marriage will.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
But I do think the missing ingredient to kind of sell, it's like, I really want to start living within our budget. And it's easy to point for the reasons why, but like get someone on board on what their life looks like when they succeed. A lot of people miss the why part, especially when it's not something that's beneficial to both parties. Hey, I think I want to change careers. So I want to quit. I want to go back to school. By the way, that means you're going to be the only income earner. Like that's not the way someone sells it, right? But it feels that way to the other person. It's like, oh, I'm on the hook for the next 4 years while you get to recreate your life. But like creating a space where people can explore that and truly understand it. So it's like, when he comes to me with that request, I'm like, okay, it's going to be hard. I'll probably need your help along the way too, but like, let's get through this. And then what happens is like you earn the trust so that you can take turns. Sometimes you're taking turns for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month, sometimes it could be even longer, that one person's needs have to kind of be in the lead. And then you switch. Yeah. Unfortunately, without that conversation, it's usually whoever is clearest about what they want or the most dominant person.
Sure. Yep.
And it's a very unbalanced relationship. And that's why it eventually falls apart.
Yeah. Especially if you have two drivers. Well, that's a disaster waiting to happen, right?
That you're describing me and my wife, which is why we had to come up with a way, because we can both be very aggressive.
Sure.
We can be both very decisive. And what's nice is we often agree a lot. We can be very like, the person who helped us with our house, like the paint colors, he wanted us to meet for 3 hours. And I was like, what do you mean to pick our palette? He goes, that's how long it takes. And I was like, it won't take us that long. We'll be done in 30 minutes. He goes, no one's ever done in 30 minutes. We were done in 20.
20 done.
And we didn't change a single color. It's like, nope, I like that. Yep, I love that too. Let's go. And like, that's who we are. So alignment and understanding and making space for safe conversation is huge.
Wow. Safe conversation, alignment, impact, the one thing. I think that is about as good as a spot as any to wrap this up. The guest is Jay Papasan, the co-author of The One Thing, one of my favorite books of all time. Just so amazing. Jay, I'm going to put your podcast, the book, your goal setting retreat. I'll put all of that in the show notes, but so good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me again. Now be careful. Don't let anybody choke you out tomorrow morning.
Okay. You got it, Jay. Thank you, buddy. Take care.
All right.